This is Cyril Weck, and you're listening to Black Op Radio.
Video computers online. Archiving 44K. Initiating sequence.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 25 seconds. T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. T-minus 10 seconds.
Satellite uplink airline.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome to Black Op Radio, the voice of political conspiracy research. You're listening to Black Op Radio, the show NSA doesn't want you to hear. Now here is your host, Leno Stanek.
You're on the air.
Fans of Black Op Radio, we are on the air. All right, we've got a great show lined up today. We have John Kellen, Catherine Bleich, and we also have the video clip of Fletcher Prouty. Now, first of all, let's get to our first guest. John, you there?
I'm here.
All right, well, John, you've been a researcher in the community for quite a while and have done some good work. So why don't you just give listeners a very brief background of yourself, and we'll get into some of the good work you've done and talk about the state of the research today.
Okay, I'm happy to do all that. First of all, thank you for having me as a guest tonight. I'm quite happy to be here.
Right.
I've been interested in the assassination for quite a long time. I think what really turned me around was hearing Mark Lane speak at the school I was going to at the time, and I think that was in 1975. It was, about an ice age ago. And he said some things that really I hadn't known. During this lecture, showed that the Zapruder film was the first time I'd seen it, and the unmistakable backwards and to the left movement of Kennedy's head and upper body. I thought there was no way to interpret that other than a shot from the front. And at that point of my life, all I knew was Lee Harvey Oswald and the Warren Report. So that really gave me some things to think about, and it was a real definite turning point in my life. But I didn't really get into it seriously and probably until about the time of the Oliver Stone movie, and really the media hysteria, if you can remember that, leading up to the release of that film, which was 91, I think.
Yeah, it's 91, 92, that era.
Yeah, they're about so close to 20 years ago, which is pretty hard to believe. And that was about the time, maybe it was a few years later, that the internet was first beginning to catch on and become a commercialized thing. And another guy and myself in 1994 started a website, e-zine, I guess was the term of the day, called Fair Play. We ran it like a magazine. And I guess we did. Well, he dropped out after a couple of issues, but I kept it going by myself. So I guess for about 5 or 6 years. Stop me if I'm getting boring. But in 1998, I attended the national conference of the Coalition on Political Assassinations, COPA, and met Vincent J. Salandri at that conference. He was the keynote speaker there in Dallas that year, and he just gave a magnificent speech that summarized his own career and really, for me, articulated the entire case in ways that I hadn't heard before. It was really the context that he put it in. Vince and I actually wound up staying in contact with each other. He gave me a copy of his speech that night, and I put it on the website, on the Fair Play website. And he called me a couple months later. We wound up staying in touch, getting to know each other. And about a year after that I had been collecting many of his early articles that he had written about the assassination as early as 1964. He's generally credited with having written and published the first article analyzing the Warren Report. It was published in, I think, October or November of 1964. In the daily legal newspaper of Philadelphia, where he lives. And so I had published that on Fair Play and 3 or 4 other of his articles. We wound up collecting those into a single volume called False Mystery, which incidentally was also the name of his speech that he gave in 1998 at that Copa conference. I guess that's what was really articulated in that speech. For me, he was saying that the assassination really is not really so much a mystery, but a false mystery, because most people, at least in their hearts, if not in their heads, understand that there was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy, and so the way he put it in that speech, and that speech was also included in the False Mystery book, by the way, had quite an impact on me. After that book was published, the False Mystery book, the collection of his early articles, he called me one day and asked me if I would like to have his assassination-related correspondence. And this is totally out of the blue. I was like flabbergasted to hear that, and I was also very excited because I'm one of those people that when I read something, I always wonder where it comes from, and I wonder who's this person behind the byline. So when he offered me all of this in effect raw material, I really jumped at the chance. He also said that if I didn't take it, his wife would just burn it as soon as he was dead, and he was only half joking, I think. But I said yes, and he shipped me 3 or 4 big boxes of stuff, and it wound up being some of the raw material that I used. As I read this material over a period of a month or so and sorted it all out, I could see the arc of a story, and I realized that I was extremely curious about all the people that we remember as first-generation critics, but I didn't know very much about them. And when I say first-generation critics, I mean people like Vince Philandria and Raymond Marcus in Los Angeles, Maggie Fields, Shirley Martin, Ken Jones Jr., Mary Farrell, and Harold, did I say Harold Weisberg, and 3 or 4 others. And so, and there was a lot of correspondence that those people had with Vince that were in these boxes that I had. So I was extremely interested in doing something with that material, and I wound up contacting all of those people, or at least those who are still alive, and writing a book about them entitled Praise from a Future Generation, which was published by Wings Press, a small Texas publisher, in October of 2007.
Now, where can we get that book?
Well, I think it's still available on Amazon, I believe. I haven't checked that site lately. Possibly a few other websites. Anyone who's interested in it, I have a couple of boxes of them still in my basement, and people can reach me if they want to buy them directly from me.
Well, if you want, I'll make a link with your email address, and people can just email you and then get an autographed copy right from you.
Okay, that'd be fine. I'm reachable through Facebook also.
Okay, well, I'll put that address there then.
Okay.
Or whatever. I'll work out something. Let me know either one you want.
All right.
Now, when you mentioned Vince Philandria, I first was made aware of him. I was invited to be part of it wasn't really a news group as it was so old that he used to type up all his correspondence and then once a month mail them out to all the different people.
Right. I remember I was involved in that also. Probably the last year or so of that group's existence.
Yeah.
And I remember your name actually being on that. It's one of the many recipients.
Yeah.
I didn't contribute much to that group, but I did receive that material, and it was great. It was really...
Yeah, it reminds me a bit about today, because I remember I finally quit that because there's a lot of arguing going on, and it's a shame that so many good-intentioned people get bogged down with, and I hate to use the word minutia because everything's important, but man, some of the little arguments that get going among things, and it's like, come on, people, we agree to 80% here, 85, it's just, there's a lot of agreement, and yet a few things that people get their back up, and it's astounding. I remember I think one of my last letters said something about a support group for Tourette syndrome. But some of these guys who had been doing that for a long time, they were quite knowledgeable of everything, and someone new wasn't going to come in and just make a mistake without getting, taken to the table. So it's quite, you had to watch what you said. I don't think he just piped up and replied with anything. I thought very long and hard before I wrote a reply to Vince or other people,
Right, and that's why I pretty much kept my, figuratively speaking, pretty much kept my mouth shut. I knew I was in the presence of my...
dealing with some heavyweights that had been around there for a while. Now, another thing was that I understand Mike Morrissey, I think he's a teacher in Germany, gathered all those letters up. I mean, I think Fletcher Proddy was calling it the Vince Times, like getting his monthly, like the New York Times or something, the Vince Times, this collection of all the letters. But Michael Morrissey has collected all those and turned them into a book.
I don't know about that. I know that he collected the correspondence between himself and Vince, and I think he did. I think that did come out in book form a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Well, there was other people in there because he changed the names for a few people. Like he decided to include stuff where, for instance, if my name was in some of the letters, he changed it, right? But
oh well, I don't know. I have not seen what he did, so I can't really speak to that. But I know that. Well, I know the correspondence between Michael and Vince were on Michael's website for a while, and I think that's the material that, or I thought that was the material that he then put into book form.
Well, regardless, he felt that some of these letters were quite important information being passed back and forth. And, in lieu of email, I think there was bulletin boards just out there where somebody would post something and somebody could read, and then if you printed that out, but now with the advent of email and now, like you say, Facebook and in these other forums, information is going back and forth instantaneously.
Right. Incidentally, some of that material that we're referencing here, what, as I remember, it was generally referred to as the Committee of Correspondence, I think. It's kind of almost a tongue-in-cheek reference to themselves, but that's how they referred to it. I first heard of it. It's mentioned in the tail end of Gaten Fonzie's book, The Last Investigation, but some of it was published in the Marty Schatz book, History Will Not Absolve Us, which I think is also still available on Amazon and maybe elsewhere. And as I say, some of the committee's material, in fact, most of it, I think, contributed to that particular book. So that's stuff, and for anyone who is interested in that material, they'll find some of it in that book, History Will Not Absolve Us, by E. Martin Schatz.
I'll have to dig up that Vince Landria speech. I've seen it every now and then that you mentioned. Maybe I'll make that as a link to this interview as well then.
I'm pretty sure, I don't know the URL off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that speech is, a few months ago, James Douglas's new book, or not new, but it came out in paperback.
Right.
JFK and the Unspeakable. And I think there's some additional end material, back matter in that book that wasn't in the hard copy, I think. And some of it points to a website that has that speech. You could probably find the Salandria speech, the false mystery speech. And you might even be able to find that just by Googling Salandria false mystery. I would bet you'd find that speech somewhere. Because I think it's still on, there's a Fair Play archive out there somewhere. I don't have much, if anything, to do with it. But I'm pretty sure it's on that. And a few other locations. So it's out there for anyone who's interested.
Now, we were just speaking about Vince Salandria and, his important observations and spearheading a research movement. A question just in from a listener. Did you ever study any Mae Brussel correspondence?
I did not. There was next to nothing about her in that correspondence from Vince, and she seems to have been outside of the little
Well, she was on the West Coast in Carmel, right?
Yeah, and she was sort of outside of the circle of the group of those critics that I wound up studying. And
Washington, Philadelphia.
No one should interpret the fact that she's not in my book as any kind of a slight against her. That really reflects my own limitations as budget limitations and my own limitations as a biographer, maybe.
You can't include you could write volumes just on me. So it's interesting that, people should pick up your book for this, praise of the first generation of researchers. There's still a few around, like you made mention of Mark Lane. He's still active in some things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he is. I think I've heard he's got a biography coming out in the not too distant future, and also a documentary film that someone put together.
He may even have a new book,
but I think it's on the horizon.
Yeah. There's a couple things because I've been in contact with him, and there may even be a new JFK book coming out.
That would be quite fascinating.
Yeah. Well, Skyhorse Publishing is reprinting Fletcher Prouty's books, and they're encouraged by the sales of Jesse Ventura. So they're picking up some of his work, and he's in contact with them, and I was glad to help facilitate a few things with that. So, and now your book available at Amazon.com, and anything else you wanted to add about that?
Yeah, that book, Praise from a Future Generation, is the title, and it was really, it's aimed, my intention anyway, it was aiming it at a general audience, and just to kind of summarize it, it's the story of the grassroots response to the JFK assassination, and how a handful of mostly ordinary citizens got involved in really the most significant political American crime of the 20th century. And I consider that book an untold story from recent American history. I think the men and women that I wrote about, these first-generation critics of the Warren Report, I really think they've had an enormous impact on shaping public opinion over the years. And I think that what they did was nothing short of heroic. I think for the most part, most people don't know their names today, and I think that's a real shame. And my book, in some small way, I'm trying to give them the credit that I think is their due. So that really was my main intention, I think, with that book.
And I guess the need for the book is because you felt that history was going by so quick that people may forget almost Herculean effort. Like these were very average people. These were not people involved in any way with any kind of previous government investigation. And when you talk about people starting to index the Warren Commission and things like that, I mean, it was just like, too bad the internet wasn't out then, because we really could have done a lot more. But it's amazing that these groups of people did network together or do parallel work.
Yeah, in some cases they were doing parallel work, and it's an exercise in a speculative sort of exercise to wonder what it might have been like. It certainly has crossed my mind if there had been an internet time. It's interesting how they did, in fact, come in contact with each other. Mark Lane, I think, was without question the central figure in that. I say at some point in my book, fairly early on, that I don't think anybody can be considered the first researcher. You hear that mentioned every now and again, or at least I did when I started looking into this stuff, and I don't think anybody can really legitimately lay claim to being the first, Warren Report critic, just because so many people were doing it independently of each other. But there's no question that Lane was the central figure in the first couple of years, because of course he attempted unsuccessfully, as it turned out, to represent Lee Harvey Oswald before the Warren Commission. I mean, he wrote this, just to kind of quickly go over what happened, he wrote a lengthy article in the days, weeks or so after that terrible weekend of November 22nd through the 24th, 1963, in which he summarized, the weaknesses of the case as he was hearing it reported in the press. And being a defense lawyer, he wrote it from that point of view, or in that style of a defense brief for Lee Oswald. The New York Times heard about that article once it was published in the National Guardian, I think about 3 or 4 weeks after the assassination. The New York Times, I think on December 18th or thereabouts, published an article, a very short article summarizing Lane's National Guardian article. In Oklahoma, a woman named Shirley Martin saw that New York Times article about Lane's article, and she clipped it out and sent it to Marguerite Oswald, who she didn't know, but whose address had been in a separate, and yet another article had been published also in the New York Times. So Marguerite Oswald got that article. She in turn contacted Lane, tried to get him to represent Oswald, and that although he wasn't ultimately not able to do that, it didn't have the effect of drawing him further into the case. And in the spring of 1964, Lane was a central figure in establishing an organization called the Citizens Committee of Inquiry, the purpose of which was to facilitate a private investigation of the known facts of the assassination and also to keep dissenting views before the public. The committee recruited a number of volunteer investigators, including Vince Landria and his brother-in-law, Harold Feldman. And that summer, the summer of 1964, these volunteers went to Dallas on the Citizens Committee of Inquiry's behalf. So they conducted some interesting investigations during that time, some pretty remarkable facts about with Helen Markham, a witness to the J.D. Tippit slaying, came out of that. And so anyway, I'm rambling, but the point being that Lane really was that central figure so many years ago, and it's really great to know that he's still active. And we're closing in, obviously, on the 50th anniversary of the assassination just a few years from now. It's significant, I think, that he's still active in the field. I think I lost my train of thought somewhere along the way.
Well, that's fine. I think what we're getting to is from previous generations to our generation right now, and I was wondering if you had any insight or advice to the way you feel research should be handled these days. I'm not encouraged by the amount of arguing going on the chat forums as opposed to cooperation in going forward with research. And it's just that's the way it is. But I wish I could somehow influence people to focus on what we agree on a little further. I mean, I'm not going to impose my will, but that's a daydream,
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and I think that for me, I do look in on several JFK websites. I don't read them real closely. I'm often dismayed at some of the arguing that I see going on there. It seems really counterproductive to me. That's, I think, really the significant thing about the Vince Landria speech that I mentioned earlier that I saw him give in 1998 at the COPA conference in Dallas. I think that really made me understand, for my own self anyway, the importance of looking at really the big picture. And I think I'm just not interested in a lot of what to me seem like smaller details. I won't say anything more specific than that, other than a lot of the what I see that passes as a burning issue of the day just doesn't interest me personally all that much. I think that was one of the most important points, one of the best parts of the Oliver Stone movie was the Donald Sutherland character, who my understanding was it was based at least in part on Fletcher Prouty, who you mentioned earlier, and I know you had a close association with for a long time. He had a meeting of evidently something like that never really happened in real life between that character and Jim Garrison, but
they spoke on the phone and they wrote letters together, and Zach Sklar, who wrote the script for that, took the text out of the letters and put it into that speech, however long he's sitting on the park bench with them.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's significant. That's probably in that the book of the film, the JFK screenplay, which incidentally I think is one of the better books that one can get on the Kennedy assassination for all of its all the annotations that are in there. But there's the part of that conversation where the Donald Sutherland character said something like, "Oh, the shots, they come from this direction, this direction. That's window dressing. That's like for the suckers." You know, the bigger picture is the bigger question is why. You know, why did this happen? And I think those are really the important questions. And I think that, well, I really think that those were answered pretty much by the end of the Garrison investigation. I think that there's been some interesting and important work done since that time, but nothing that's really split the case open the way we all want to see it split open, and the way that I think Jim Garrison came very close to splitting open.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to grab 2 or 3 books, and you should know what happened. You know, not to the nth degree that maybe some people have dove into it, but if you read, Jim Douglas's book, Why He Died and Why It Matters, right? JFK and the Unspeakable. Jim Garrison, On the Trail of the Assassins, right? Anything by Fletcher Prouty. You're the people that say, look, this is what happened. If you find it uncomfortable, fine, but it's like you say, almost a transparent. Anyone with common sense should know what happened just by the fact that the records are locked up for 75 years. Name me another crime where that is, one of the ending of evidence collection.
Okay, I will. You want me to name another crime?
Sure, go ahead.
The assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Believe it or not, the government swooped in and seized. They embargoed most of the evidence. We got some of it got out. But most of it was suppressed for many years. The last of the records, I think, were released in the mid 1930s sometime.
Right, but our understanding now is that there's 8 people, and wasn't it the first woman ever hung?
Well, she probably wasn't the first one ever hung, but there was definitely one of the conspirators, Mary Surratt, I think, or something like that. Her name was. Right.
So for those who know more about it, can correct me, but the idea is then that there was evidence of, if it wasn't a lone gunman, it was an orchestrated effort to remove.
Right. But we kind of think of it as a lone gunman, but at the same time, there's no question that it wasn't. It obviously was a conspiracy. I mean. That's very well known. Incidentally, not to completely contradict myself, but what I was saying earlier about the Garrison case essentially splitting open the assassination or solving it or whatever, that's not to in any way diminish the significance of JFK and the Unspeakable, which I think is the present day high watermark in terms of assassination research. It's without question the James W. Douglas book, JFK and the Unspeakable, the most important book published on this case in many, many years. I would say that book and The Last Investigation by Gate and Fonzie, 2 of the most significant books of the last 20 years or so.
And one
I
thing...
don't know if that contradicts what I said earlier.
No, not at all. Because for those of us who know the topic well, there are a lot of books that go into detail after detail, but I gave JFK The Unspeakable to my mom to read. I said, hey, you don't like all the books that I read about it, but here's one you might like. And that's one I think will reach people. It's well written. Understand the implication of everything. And at certain times when you're in these investigations or behind the scenes conversations, you feel that you're right there. It was just, like you said, it's a high watermark. I can't think of anything better. And of course, for number 2, there's a lot of books. Probably stand 10 in a row, which are number 2, but if I just had to pick one, I mean, I always enjoyed Jim Garrison's On the Trail of the Assassins. I just thought that laid it out. I know he has other books that are, but can't think of anything better.
Yeah, and as you're saying this, it's dawning on me. I'm not nearly as involved in all this stuff as I used to be, although I do have a few things going on, but that was quite
Well, that's fine. I appreciate you coming to speak to me. I wanted to let people know about your book again and not let people forget about previous work and your work that was helping to keep that alive, the effort of first-generation researchers who really went out on a limb. I think for the Mark Lanes and the Flandres and the other people and the Mae Brustles and all these people that might have taken a toll, the amount of research and time they had to spend just to try to, I think, level the playing field and get everyone else who doesn't have the time to look into it. And, of course, the real shame is that we're hearing people are taking Vince Bugliosi seriously and, DiCaprio, but it's up to the research community to offer something better. Right now, I think we can offer James Douglas, Jim Douglas, but
and if I can add, one more thought, we're just now into 2011. It's only it's less than 3 years now until we'll be at the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, and it really is going to be, I think, the last hurrah, so to speak, of
getting public interest
in this case, and it's already started, but it's obvious, I think, that there is going to be a tremendous onslaught from the opposition in trying to bury this case once and for all. And it's already started, and they're going to bring out all of their heavyweights. Of course, they've got all the power. They've got the media, a stranglehold on the media. I think this is a really important time that those of us who know we're on the side of truth, even those of us who disagree with each other, we have to find some kind of way to stand shoulder to shoulder and have as much unity as we possibly can. It is critically important, in my opinion, and the time to start is now. And I understand you've got something going on in that respect with conference you're trying to organize for Hawaii. I don't know much about that. I've heard a little bit about it, but I don't know much about it.
I'll send you some emails.
I hope that the 50th anniversary is very much on the agenda, because I think it's an incredibly important time that we're already into, and it's going to only intensify in the next couple of years as we approach November 22nd, 2013. It's going to be the last big battle in this war. So I would urge everyone to think very seriously about that and emphasize those things that we have in common, and never forget the fact that we all have a common goal in this. And that goal is the truth.
Words of wisdom. Thanks, John, for being a guest on Black Op. I'll have to make sure I don't wait so long again before I have you on again.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm delighted to have had the opportunity.
Okay. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you, Len.
We can now say, with moral certainty and considerable scientific authority, that the death of JFK was committed by a meticulously executed conspiracy which was obscured by an extensive cover-up. Murder in Dealey Plaza, edited by James Fetzer, goes to the heart of the JFK assassination. You'll read new and up-to-date information regarding the Secret Service, the Lincoln limousine, the medical evidence, the cover-up, altering the film, framing the patsy, and the silent historians. Also, 16 smoking guns, each one crushing the government's lone assassin scenario. A world-class chronology of November 22nd, 1963. Chapters by David W. Mantic, Gary Aguilar, Vincent Palomera, Douglas Weldon, Jack White, Ira David Wood III, James H. Fetzer, Doug Horn, and a classic essay by Bertrand Russell. The complete story in the pages of one single book, edited by James H. Fetzer. Read it now, read it again. You'll use it as a reference. Murder in Dealey Plaza. Available at Amazon.com and major bookstores around the world. It's murder. New from U.S. author Mike Palachuk, Camp America. Here's what American poet David Ray has to say. Mike Palachuk reminds me of Socrates, the gadfly who asked unwelcome questions, Diogenes with his lantern looking in vain for an honest man, Chekhov, the man with the hammer challenging a complacent family to share their meal, Kerouac, the ever-on-the-move, somewhat hysterical searcher, and he also reminds me of many Americans whose children were so blasted with propaganda that they're devoting the rest of their lives to challenging the lies and all who tell them. In this land where babies are brought by storks and buildings collapse due to unpatriotic bricks, we need the gadfly, because no leader, preacher, guru, or saint will wake us up, though the doomsday clock is ticking close to 12. David Ray, American poet, author of The Endless Search and The Death of Sardanapalus and other poems of the Iraq Wars. To order Camp America and all of Mike Palachek's books, go to the New American Dream website, www.newamerican.dream.info. Howard Zinn writes, Mike Palachek writes with passion, wit, and always with a strong social conscience. Camp America, from author Mike Palachek. The website again, newamerican.dream.info. Even Bush admits that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. Our own FBI acknowledged it has no hard evidence that ties Osama bin Laden to 9/11. But if Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11, and if Osama had nothing to do with 9/11, then who did it? Who did it? The 9/11 conspiracy provides the answer. Discover the big picture. Learn what we know now. Find out what it means. 11 experts contribute to exposing the truth as the anatomy of an atrocity. Edited by James H. Fester. Buy it now if you have the courage to face the truth. Just don't think you're going to like it. The 9/11 conspiracy provides the answer.
That's quite an introduction to Gold Warriors. I thank you for that. I've got a bunch of questions I want to discuss now with you, some items. First of all, is your book still available?
Yeah, it's available both as a paperback from a publisher in Britain and the United States called Verso, and it's available at Amazon as a Kindle ebook.
Yeah, I'll make a link to that then.
Yeah, you can download it and read it on any machine.
Right. So the first question is that you've said quite a bit here about America coming into getting this gold, them not announcing to anyone that they actually had it, and they're using it for whatever they felt was a foreign policy of not the Congress, but the secret society that Lansdale and Allen Dulles and McCloy, these others, would see fit to use, and for instance, against the war against communism. Now, how many interviews then have you done for this? I mean, I think it sounds like hundreds.
No, I haven't. I've done exactly one interview in the last 15 years.
No, that's not what I meant. I meant how many people did you interview to collect this information then?
Well, I mean, my wife is a superb researcher and a good writer. So the two of us have been working on this for 30 years. And of course, I grew up in Asia as a little boy on the border between China and Burma. My father was a doctor there he was a surgeon who decided he didn't want to be a millionaire Park Avenue surgeon. He wanted to go out and be good to people who had no medical care at all. So I grew up on the Burmese side of a river facing China. And on the Chinese side was the base where the Flying Tigers airplanes were assembled, taken out of crates and put together so they could fly. So when I was 4 or 5 years old, I got to know all these flying tigers. They gave me a tiger cub as a pet. And I met Madame Chang at that point because she kept her plane down there at Loy Wing, the name of the Chinese base. So I've been in Asia pretty much all my life. In fact, if not in spirit, or in spirit if not in fact. And I've picked up a tremendous amount of backstory from people I've talked to. Both my brothers worked for the CIA. Well, one worked for the CIA and the other for NSA, but I was the black sheep in the family, so neither one of them talked to me. But other people who were in the agency out in the Far East mistook me for them and told me things they shouldn't have. So it was a real lark.
Right. I guess getting back to that, though, it sounds like that when people have died, you've interviewed their wife or business partners, or it's hundreds of interviews that have resulted in this depth of knowledge.
Oh, absolutely. For example, I spent an entire day with Bohannon's widow. I interviewed Lansdale. I interviewed him unsuccessfully, I would say, because he was very restrained. He made one remark about, I'll quote it to you. He said, "Everything changed after we debriefed Kojima." And I didn't know at that time, 20, 30, 40 years ago, who the hell Kojima was. Now I know what he meant is that after they discovered the gold, everything changed. Everything changed for him. Everything changed for America. America became just obsessed with what they've done with money. I mean, you know, Nixon took us off the gold standard, and since then, the country's just gone to hell and is on the verge of going down the toilet this year. China is coming up. The euro is much stronger than the dollar, and China's yuan is going to possibly end up being the global currency that the U.S. dollar used to be. But the thing that worries me most is that I have a lot of friends and relatives in the States. I live in France, and I'm a French citizen now, thank God, which protects me from getting tormented by the U.S. Treasury Department because I keep revealing their secrets. But there are a lot of friends of mine in the United States and family of mine in the United States that I don't want to see have to go through what Egypt is going through now.
Well, my interest here is that this gold, this immense amount of money that Ed Lansdale and Dulles and these other people knew existed, they used it for whatever they wanted to. And I think that might be an idea that's new to some people, not familiar with your work. So I recommend everyone get your book. But just to discuss things further now, there is a precedent that you discussed a little bit, and maybe we could just bring this up, that in 1948, after the war, CIA ended up with a lot of Ethiopian money, and they used that to fund election tampering in Italy. And this was discovered. Can you just discuss that a bit? Because it's kind of a precedent for what has happened further down the line.
Well, essentially, it was because the guy who later on became chief of counter-espionage at the CIA, Jesus Angleton was the guy who was given the job of destroying the Italian Communist Party and making sure that the right-wing Italian political party opposed to it won the elections. And the way he did this was to bring the mafia in and give them money, all the money he could get his hands on, including money from the Philippines, money from Ethiopia, probably which had gone to Ethiopia from the Philippines. And so this guy literally pulled it off. He had so many Italian leftists murdered that they failed. I mean, they were immensely popular after the war. Nobody wanted a fascist government again. But Angleton pulled it off, and he got another fascist government in. So, you know, they did the same thing in Greece. They prevented the underground that had become, if you will, a communist underground against the Nazis during the war. They prevented the really loyal, strong, formidable Greek underground from gaining power after the war, and instead turned it over to the Greek generals. And it's been essentially controlled either by the Greek generals or occasionally by a left-wing government when the Greek generals mess things up too much. Same thing has happened in other European countries. You know, they just keep, they will do anything to keep dictators in power and to keep the common people who they talk about, openness, democracy, you know, all of this stuff is just rubbish. You hear it coming from the State Department right now, from Mrs. Clinton. You hear it coming from the White House. It's not true. The best thing I heard said about democracy in recent years was when Vladimir Putin, after getting himself elected, was criticized by the United States, who said, well, it wasn't really a free and fair election. And Putin said, well, America's not exactly in a position to talk about democracy. It made me think Putin's got a hell of a good sense of humor.
Right. Well, that was my first thought, that when this precedent was well known and written about for the 1948 election with this Ethiopian money showing up, you start to recognize that this funds, this idea that they would put this in different banks all over the world, it would be a resource, that Lansdale and others, I mean, the quote that I heard from Ed Lansdale when Fletcher Prouty was asking him, how do you fund all of these operations? And he said, I just had a blank check from Uncle Sam. As starting to rereading your book again and starting to recognize for myself that the idea that when he says Uncle Sam, he means his boys back in Washington. He doesn't mean maybe the current president, or, it's just like, for what we want to do in our circle, I'm enacting it, and I've got a blank check because I know there's an availability of funds that is almost limitless, and it's not having to be approved by Congress or anybody. So
that's absolutely the truth. I mean, the White House is irrelevant, and Congress is irrelevant. I mean, Congress is owned by the people who are there handing them thousands and thousands of dollars from corporations all over America. Okay? I mean, there was a joke last week that one of the biggest corporations in America had fired 25 congressmen. Well, I mean, the guys who really run things in Washington were, at least in the time we're talking about, the time frame after World War II, were the Dulles brothers, Lyndon Johnson, his boss, who was also from Texas and was the head of the House of Representatives. He was the one who stuffed the ballot box in the 13th District in Texas to get Lyndon Johnson elected. I mean, it's all crooked. It's all rotten. Somebody wrote a book recently on counterfeiting in America. I mean, it's a tradition in America to counterfeit. Do you know, I talked to a guy who had retired from the U.S. government printing office, and he said he had been in charge all his career since around 1945. He had been in charge of a section that printed presidential dollars for every president, so that that president could hand as many presidential dollars as he wanted to anybody he wanted. Take this, it's a gift. See my picture on it? The other side's got a Masonic pyramid, with the Eye of Ra on top of it, the sun god. The people that really run the country are the ones who are so rich you hardly ever see them. Take the Rockefellers, for example, or the Mellons. The Mellons helped set up the OSS. The Rockefellers are the ones who are continually supplying people to do the thinking for the president. Guys like Kissinger, okay? And, I mean, Kissinger Associates was a Rockefeller outfit. It's these super guys who control the Council on Foreign Relations. These are the guys at the very, very top. And they don't have to do anything except pick up a phone. You've got yourself a blank checkbook.
Okay, so just recapping a little bit, we understand that this enormous sums of gold has been hidden away. CIA assets now have an avenue to it. It's hidden from the American people. Now it's just used at the discretion of let's call it a secret team. So Dulles, John McCloy, why don't you just discuss maybe a little bit of John McCloy and the World Bank, and then I want to just get on to the M Fund.
Well, I think that the World Bank and all of these organizations are in on the same thing. At the very top, the people at the very top are in on the same thing. It goes back to World War I. It goes back before that. There are people who are so powerful, and their money is all offshore, or they own, just 600,000 acres of the Brazilian rainforest. These are people who are rich as Croesus, and they all know each other, and they all believe that the world would be better if you could get rid of about 2/3 to 3/4 of the people. And these are the guys who ended up with all that gold and made it disappear. Now, where have they made it disappear to? This is the question I ask myself 100 times a day. Where the hell has all this gold gone? Why should there be a financial crisis in the United States when I know from going through the archives in Albany that Santee put $50 billion in gold into Citibank? I know it. I've seen it. It's corroborated by the New York State government inspectors. So where the hell is all that money gone? How can Citibank declare itself on the verge of bankruptcy? How come Rockefeller-owned banks owned by, Rockefeller Holdings, how can they keep absorbing each other? I mean, they absorbed Chemical Bank into Citibank. Well, Citibank is owned by the same people in the end who own Chase. Chase swallows Morgan. Morgan swallows Chase. It's a game that they're playing, and none of us are allowed to know what's going on. It's the world's greatest pyramid scheme, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, one of the things that you illuminate that America was able to take the gold in and issue this paper, Federal Reserve special certificates, to various people, and then you vaguely mentioned it earlier in the interview, but maybe you should discuss Norbert Schley and the idea that if people have found these certificates, they'll be arrested if they even try to reclaim them. It's quite an interesting story, and you said pyramid scheme. That's what makes me think of that.
Well, Norbert Schley was an exceptional human being. He was a brilliant man, tall, lean, good-looking guy with a brilliant education. He was Bobby Kennedy's deputy in the Justice Department, okay? And the man was truly exceptional, morally, ethically, and in every other way. And he had his own law firm after he left the government. And he was approached by some people who said, look, I've got these Japanese bonds, and I'm having trouble trying to cash them or even to collect the interest from them. Can you help me? And so, well, he decided in the end he would try to help them. He would investigate it. So he went to Japan, and boy, did he scare the hell out of them. They got so frightened that they started coming down on Norbert Schley. They caused so much trouble for him. They created false accusations against him for half a dozen different things. They took him to court. They found a judge who was agreeable to persecute Norbert Schley. They brought people in Japan who worked for different banks there that had issued this currency for the Japanese government, issued these notes, which were called 57s after the year of Hirohito's reign in which they were issued. And these guys all lied. And they lied and they lied and they lied. And Norbert Schley got booted out of the legal profession. It cost him, he told me, it cost him more than $10 million to defend himself. He spent every penny he'd ever saved, every penny he could borrow, and they just destroyed him, or tried to, but he kept his chin up. And then one day, he's jogging along the beach out in California. He lived in forget the name of the place, just outside LA. And he was jogging along the beach, and something hit him in the ankle, or just above the ankle in the thigh, and he collapsed. And a bum who was sleeping in a phone booth came down and found that he was dead. Well, it was blamed on some kind of blood clot in the brain. But this kind of thing has been done by the CIA time and time and time again. They use an air pressure gun like the Romanians or the Bulgarians did when they shot those Bulgarian emigres that worked for the BBC. They called it an umbrella gun because they put the air gun inside an umbrella. Then they put a little tiny jeweler's watch bearing in it, which is hollowed out with a laser. So there are two holes penetrating this tiny little ball bearing. And they fill it with ricin poison, which comes from the castor bean plant. And then they shoot somebody with that, and within 24 hours, he's dead. And it's been metabolized by the body, so nobody doing an autopsy can determine that there was any strange substance that provoked the death. So they think that they died from something bad food. They ate some bad food. Well, this has been done time and again, hundreds of times. And the same thing is done with different kinds of poisons. And there are all sorts of poisons that can be used to provoke an instant heart attack. And I seriously believe that my friend Larry Stern, who was deputy managing editor of the Washington Post, was killed in exactly the same way when he was jogging on a beach up in New England, and he felt something like a bee sting in his leg, and he stopped, and the next minute he was dead. So I know enough about these guys. The book I wrote called Yellow Rain is an account of how I discovered the poison that was used to cause all those people to bleed to death internally in Laos, and I discovered the same thing was happening in Afghanistan and had happened in the Yemen many, many years earlier when Mubarak was head of the Egyptian Air Force. I mean, for Christ's sake, these guys have got such sophisticated weapons, there's no way we can catch up with them. The only thing we can do is try like hell to dispose of them one way or the other and replace them with honest people who've got some ethics.
Okay. The M Fund then.
Yes, the M Fund. Okay. You had this guy, Prime Minister for a while of Japan, and he had a great deal of money and he wanted to get a great deal more. So he was at one time the Treasury, the boss of the Japanese Treasury, and so he had connections inside the Treasury Department there. And what he did was he had them print fake Japanese Treasury bearer certificates. And these were used to swindle people because he would sell these things to people, promising to pay them back an enormous sum of money afterwards, when, in fact, when they brought these papers back and tried to collect, they found that they were denounced as fraud, counterfeit. Okay, the M Fund worked exactly the same way. This was U.S. recovered gold, recovered in Japan, recovered in the Philippines, that was turned over to a guy who worked for General Macarthur, and they gave it the M Fund name because his name started with an M. So this was money that was used to pay off the bad guys, buy them, get them to join our side, and get them to kill, in some cases, the people that we regarded as our enemies, who then, in that day, were leftists. I mean, the only American reform that was actually completed in Japan was the land reform program. All other reform programs that we had planned for Japan were canceled. And, pardon me, the M Fund grew and grew until it was $2 or $3 trillion worth. There was another fund that Macarthur created specially for Hirohito and his family, and it's called the Showa Fund. Showa, in that case, meaning that he was the emperor called Showa. This continues today under the current emperor, Akihito, and is said to be the biggest fund in the world at this point. It's grown enormously because naturally all the Japanese banks give the imperial family favorable treatment and the very, very highest possible rate of interest. So you've got the M Fund, which has been a scandal in Japan for 40 years, 50 years. You've got the Showa Fund, which is hardly talked about because nobody talks about the emperor and his family in Japan. They have the same kind of funds in other countries, and it's impossible to tell what they've done with all the gold. I suspect that they've siphoned the gold off to individual bank accounts in safe havens, and that's why they don't have any gold left in New York, so they're in deep trouble.
Yeah, my question, I guess, is going to go a little deeper to this M Fund, because I understand through some of your research that you found that Nixon was playing a game with this, and he had gone to meet Ed Lansdale to return the M Fund to some of the wealthy businessmen, and they would in turn thank him by giving him kickbacks of cash for his illegal, campaign. Well, I'll let you describe it.
Well, essentially, it's a very simple story. Nixon offered the Japanese a great sum of money and gold in return for the Japanese indirectly supporting his election campaign to become president of the United States. And they did it. That is the Nixon story. Nixon, who also was borrowing money from Meyer Lansky. I mean, the guy was a rat. And what else can I tell you about it? It's just another one of these horrible things that you trip over. Peggy and I are tripping over this stuff all the time, and a lot of it we're getting exhausted trying to figure out who the hell has ended up with all this money. Where is it? It's all disappeared. There is gold all over the place, and yet nobody seems to have it. Where is it? I think the first thing they should do is to do an audit of the Fed, and they ought to do an audit of Fort Knox, and then they ought to do some serious ass-kicking.
Right. We've heard about the BCCI scandal, and also for those who are not familiar with it, it's the Nugan Hand Bank scandal, where I think a lot of this money in Asia, Vietnam era, was siphoned into Australia, and then when the time came, these people just pulled everything out. Can you discuss a little bit about...
Yeah, that's a lovely story, because it involves Rupert Murdoch, one of the world's great jerks. Rupert Murdoch was at that time running a weekly newspaper in Australia, and he was hanging around with a bunch of cronies of the CIA station chief in Canberra, who happened to be one of the guys we've been talking about earlier. And they got to discussing Goebbels, and the idea was that the United States, if they could just control all of the sources of information in America, they wouldn't have any trouble keeping the population of America quiet and obedient and steering them into buying more Pizza Hut pizzas and McDonald's burgers. Keep them fat and happy, like the Roman emperors did. Show them some really ghastly movies where the Christians get eaten by the lions. This kind of thing that they do with synthetic effects nowadays. You get your avatars fighting in the middle of the ring. Well, Nugenhand was one of the Paul Helliwell banks. It was a black bank that was laundering money in Australia, and it opened offices elsewhere, and that they had former Pentagon generals and admirals who were the heads of Nugenhand branches in different countries. It looked like it was going to really succeed until they did something stupid. I don't know exactly what it was, but one of them got murdered. I can't remember whether it was Nugen or Hand was found dead in his car, shot between the eyes or something.
Right, no, in the back of the head, I think. They said it was a suicide, and it was a shotgun blast to the back of the head for Nugen, who was a grocer, and evidently, Hand, who had worked with the agency, had just disappeared, and the money was gone the next day. The Australian government was baffled.
It's lovely. Now, let me pursue Rupert Murdoch just a little bit more. The CIA station chief persuaded him to come to America on the basis that he'd get American citizenship overnight, which he did. It takes at least 3 days if you pull every string in the world. He got it overnight, and then, for some reason, they changed the legislation about monopoly control of media. Newspapers, radio, television. Used to be you couldn't own more than, say, one station in one town. You couldn't own all the stations in one town because then you'd have a monopoly and you could control what people heard. Well, they changed all of this, and Rupert Murdoch began with the deepest pockets you've ever seen. Where he got the money, nobody knows. He began buying everything. He bought newspapers, he bought television channels, he bought television networks, he put satellites up. He did the same thing in England. He's now bought the Wall Street Journal of all things. How shameful for them to sell it to such a lout. I really think that this guy is the persona non grata of the media world, and how it is no longer possible to get really solid, serious news reported on any American network, so that you have to go to Al Jazeera or one of the European stations, or RT in Russia, or CCTV in China, in order to find out what's going on, because nobody in the United States is going to tell you to do anything more than enjoy the baseball, enjoy the basketball, have another really wretched beer, and then go eat 16 more hamburgers and a pizza. This is the way things have turned out, and it's very sad. A country that could have been supremely great by being more generous with its attitude and less generous with its money would have made a huge difference in the future. Instead of that, I'm afraid we're going to end up with Egypt in the U.S. New York is going to turn into Cairo before the next several months are gone. I hear people predicting this left and right all over the place. And meanwhile, Rupert Murdoch's Fox News and all the outspoken imbeciles that work for him deceive the world and take advantage of the fact that Americans are not very well educated. I mean, hell, you point at Tanzania and you say, "What's this?" And they say, "Oh, I think that's Russia." And you point to some huge island like Tasmania, and they say, "That's Ireland." How the hell do they get so totally confused when they've been to school for so many years? I finally decided 30 years ago that I'd had enough. I moved to Europe, and I've been here ever since. I haven't set foot in the States or in England in all that time. And I won't do it, because I've been warned that if I do, they're going to plant something in my luggage, or they're going to fake something on the mag stripe card in my passport, and I'm going to get salted away till hell freezes over.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that. At least you got some kind of a warning, though. You know, congratulations on your writing, and I can see just from, the questions, I'm going to have you on again to go in depth. I just wanted people to know about your work and your research, the idea that some of these covert operations and some of the things were well funded beyond anyone's belief, I think, and comprehension. And the amount of money out there is really it's incomprehensible. I mean, you talk about these treasure troves, the caves just full of gold. I mean, there was, at least to start with, 12 major ones, and then just a lot of them, and that's only in the Philippines. And like you mentioned, some of the ships that sank or were sunk on purpose and hidden. And then when there was they surrounded the island, and there was a quarantine where the ships couldn't get to the Philippines anymore, this gold went somewhere, and it was held onto by assets of the intelligence agencies, and then funneled to organized crime to get rid of, to move. It's quite a story. And I recommend people getting the Gold Warriors.
There's a hell of a good story in the fact that the CIA has been in partnership with the mafia and with the Chinese mafia for so long. It's unbelievable. These guys are all crooks, and they're taking us to the cleaners. And all they're thinking about is, are they going to get laid this weekend, or are they going to be able to get the game of golf in that they wanted to have? I give up on them.
One thing I was going to ask you about, I had heard a little bit about Valeriano and Lansdale and that from my interviews with Fletcher Prouty. Had you ever interviewed Fletcher, and what was your opinion of his information?
I thought he was terrific. I met him at a bunch of Washington, D.C. cocktail parties. And we would stand around and talk and talk and talk and just have a hell of a good time. He was a marvelous guy, really savvy man who had known Lansdale ever since Manila in 1945. And if I recall correctly, just before the Kennedy assassination, General Lansdale ordered Colonel Prouty to go to Antarctica. Got him out of the way. Otherwise, he might have suspected, as many of us did, that something really bad was going to happen to Kennedy at any minute.
Right. Well, there's a lot of research to be done. Yeah. Sterling, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thanks for sharing so much time.
I'm having a wonderful time ventilating. Thank you very much, Len, for the chance to do so.
Well, thank you. You mentioned you haven't really given too many interviews, so this is, I really feel thankful for you sharing your time and opinions. I'll urge everyone to get Gold Warriors and look into it further. We can have you back and maybe get more input, and we can discuss some of your other books as well. But this is, I think, quite interesting for anyone interested in the CIA, the early days of Vietnam, Korean War, just how does these things get funded? I think your wife had written in here. I mean, the book is co-written by Peggy Seagrave as well. We should mention that. So between the two of you. But she said the war is, if I'm paraphrasing properly, that, soldiers shooting at soldiers is only one half of it. Where all this loot and wealth of a nation goes after the fact, or during, that's another half of the story too. That the war is over, banking concerns fighting. One group, whoever they were, wanting the gold of another nation and plunder. And in this case, like you ask over and over again, okay, the war is over, what happened to all the gold? Where did it go?
The funny thing is, nobody has ever even threatened to sue us. But many, many people have threatened to kill us. It gives me a big charge. I really feel, I know it sounds crazy, but it gives me a real charge to think that there are all these people out there who would just love to kill me.
Well, keep writing. We need this information, and it's grounds for people to go into the story further and investigate. Like you said, I mentioned just before the interview, I don't think anybody's really heard of Valeriano or Charles Bohannon, and a few people they've heard the name Ed Lansdale. They don't really know what he did. They don't really know how high up the chain he was, how close to Alan Dulles and the secret team of organized, well-funded people.
A lot of this stuff can be found if you go to the Educational Forum, which is a British online magnificent archive of it, incredibly good information, which is related to Spartacus.com, and they have so much stuff on these guys, and also the books of Doug Valentine and others, just wonderful sources. So anybody who really gets wound up about this and wants to learn more, there's a tremendous amount of information available.
Okay. Just before I let you go then, are you working on something new then? Is there something else on the horizon we should expect from...
I think we're going to put all our books up at Kindle, so they'll be available to people all over the world for the first time. Instead of just to people in the U.S. and the British Commonwealth and countries where it's translated. We've had books translated into Mongol and God knows how many different languages. But we're converting them all into Kindle books and updating them at the same time so that they're really
up to date.
Up to date with the latest stuff that's come out since the books were first written 5, 10, 15 years ago. Sung Dynasty is being rewritten massively. It's 30 years old, 25 years old now, and we've got incredible good material that we're putting into a new edition of it, which should be finished by autumn. And beyond that, I think we're just going to take a break, go somewhere, God knows where.
Okay.
Just have some fun. It's time to have some fun because doing one book after another for 30 years is a real chore.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Sterling. And I hope to discuss a little further down the road, but I think this is a good opening interview for people to be acquainted with your work.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks again.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Black Op Radio, broadcasting weekly from the Fiasco Brothers recording studio in Vancouver, Canada. You're listening to the Fiasco Brothers Radio Network. Black Ops Radio presents Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, the DVD Complete Collection. Finally, the DVD set you've been waiting for is available. Over 15 hours with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Over 15 hours. Interviews with Len Osanic, John Judge, David Radcliffe, and more. This is a one-of-a-kind set. These interviews feature Fletcher Prouty having candid conversations regarding his 23 years in the military, but specifically 9 years in the Pentagon from 1955 to 1964. His inside knowledge is invaluable to researchers of this era of American and world history. These are the revelations you've been waiting for. Over 15 hours with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, the complete DVD collection. Available at the Colonel Prouty reference site, www.prouty.org, and blackopradio.com. New from U.S. author Mike Palachuk, Champ America. Here's what American poet David Ray has to say. Mike Palachuk reminds me of Socrates, the gadfly who asked unwelcome questions. Diogenes with his lantern looking in vain for an honest man. Chekhov, the man with the hammer challenging a complacent family to share their meal. Kerouac, the ever-on-the-move, somewhat hysterical searcher, and he also reminds me of many Americans who as children were so blasted with propaganda that they're devoting the rest of their lives to challenging the lies and all who tell them. In this land where babies are brought by storks and buildings collapse due to unpatriotic bricks, we need the gadfly, because no leader, preacher, guru, or saint will wake us up, though the doomsday clock is ticking close to 12. David Ray, American poet, author of The Endless Search and The Death of Sardanapalus and other poems of the Iraq Wars. To order Camp America and all of Mike Palachuk's books, go to the New American Dream website, www.newamericandream.info. Howard Zinn writes, Mike Palachuk writes with passion, wit, and always with a strong social conscience. Champ America, from author Mike Palachuk. The website again, newamericandream.info. We can now say, with moral certainty and considerable scientific authority, that the death of JFK was committed by a meticulously executed conspiracy which was obscured by an extensive cover-up. Murder in Dealey Plaza, edited by James Fetzer, goes to the heart of the JFK assassination. You'll read new and up-to-date information regarding the Secret Service, the Lincoln limousine, the medical evidence, the cover-up, altering the film, framing the patsy, and the silent historians. Also, 16 smoking guns, each one crushing the government's lone assassin scenario. A world-class chronology of November 22nd, 1963. Chapters by David W. Mantic, Gary Aguilar, Vincent Palomera, Douglas Weldon, Jack White, Ira David Wood III, James H. Fetzer, Doug Horn, and a classic essay by Bertrand Russell. The complete story in the pages of one single book, edited by James H. Fetzer. Read it now, read it again. You'll use it as a reference. Murder in Dealey Plaza. Available at Amazon.com and major bookstores around the world. It's murder. It's a political rally. A free speech zone. A town hall meeting. It's an interrogation at NSA headquarters. Now, it's time to make a statement. Time to represent. Time to let them know who you are. That you're part of the Black Ops. With a brand new Black Ops Radio t-shirt. Guns and all prizes. Wear it loud and proud. Join the Black Ops today. www.blackopradio.com. Even Bush admits that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. Our own FBI acknowledged it has no hard evidence that ties Osama bin Laden to 9/11. But if Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11, and if Osama had nothing to do with 9/11, then who did it? The 9/11 conspiracy provides the answer. Discover the big picture. Learn what we know now. Find out what it means. 11 experts contribute to exposing the truth as the anatomy of an atrocity. Edited by James H. Fetzer. Buy it now if you have the courage to face the truth. Just don't think you're going to like it. If you believe there's more to the JFK assassination and the mystery surrounding the CIA and its covert operations, you're not alone. Meet the man Oliver Stone called X in the epic motion picture JFK. Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty comes forward with never-before-seen or heard documentation and information about JFK, the Vietnam War, the CIA, and more on a brand-new CD-ROM. The collected works of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty is an incredible offer not to be missed. For a limited time only, find the answers surrounding these issues and more with the collected works of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Call now at area code 604-525-4167. That's area code 604-525-4167. Or visit the Colonel Prouty reference site on the World Wide Web for collected works of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Stem cell research, abortion, cloning, evolution, creation science, intelligent design. These are hot button issues today. Religion and science, morality and government, corporations and fascism. If you want to know what's happening to this nation this very day, then you won't want to miss Render Unto Darwin. After 35 years of teaching logic, critical thinking, and scientific reasoning, Jim Fetzer offers a critique of the Christian rights crusade against science. If you want to understand the issues, if you want to be informed, this is a book you won't want to miss. Render Unto Darwin at Amazon.com and the major bookstores. Render Unto Darwin.
Interviews with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Secrets of the U-2 Flight. We are pleased to announce Volume 1 of Interviews with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty on DVD. This first one-hour DVD goes through the 1960 U-2 incident with Gary Powers. Colonel Fletcher Prouty reveals his inside knowledge of the incident, his office in the Pentagon, Operation Aquatone, Soviet overflights, and the similar Alan Pope incident. It is Prouty's position that the U-2 flight was sabotaged by the members of a secret team to stop the crusade for peace and embarrass President Eisenhower, thereby heating up the Cold War. And of course, Eisenhower warned everyone of the industrialized military complex that he had learned of firsthand in this incident. You will learn Gary Powers' U-2 never was shot down at 70,000 feet, as claimed in every single history book. 4 separate interviews on one DVD, a one-of-a-kind must-have for anyone interested in finding the truth behind the cover stories. Interviews with Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. Secrets of the U-2 Flight.